I'm thrilled to be able to introduce tonight's speakers and panelists. We've got John, Emily, and Kathy, and then we also are going to be facilitated by Dr. Barry Ramos. And Dr. Barry Ramos is a longstanding friend of the Academy. His 2 children went here, and he is the medical director of the New Heart Center for Wellness, Fitness, and Cardiac Rehab. It's a bit of a mouthful. He's also the clinical professor at UNM School of Medicine and the medical editor for KOAT-TV. So I will turn it over to Dr. Ramo, and thank you so much to our group for being here tonight. Welcome to the Academy.
My children participated in that wilderness program, and it was truly life-changing for them. Let me begin by first thanking the Academy for allowing us to do this program. Lori Peterkin here has coordinated these programs for the last several years, has just done a wonderful job in coming up with fascinating programs. And also I want to thank the City of Albuquerque and the Cultural Services for doing the filming for this, so for people who could not come to this, they can watch it. I want to introduce Steve McLaughlin and Drew Harrell, who are right here. Steve is one of my former students. Both of them, when they see me, they start to tremble because they think I'm going to ask them EKG questions. But both of them really have made an important impact in this community. Steve is the head of one of the premier departments in the University of New Mexico School of Medicine, which has many, by the way. But he has a very large program training people from all over the country and really has done an enormous job. And Drew is the medical director for the Grand Canyon medical program that they've done for a number of years, which really sort of brings me to the subject of tonight's talk. As a physician, one of the things that we would like to be able to do before they happen is to predict exactly what it is that's going to happen. Whether you're a cardiologist and you have to deal with the problem of sudden cardiac arrest where there's no warning, or whether you are a person who's out in the battlefield and you're a soldier and you're having changes in cognitive and physical function that you don't even recognize, but if left untreated, would ultimately turn into a disaster, or whether you are someone who goes down and up the Grand Canyon and potentially puts yourself into a very dangerous place. I have a very nice story here because Emily Pierce was a ranger and a paramedic in the Grand Canyon. And during that time, she did 2 things. One is she taught people how to hike safely, but secondly, what she did is she evacuated a large number of people who, for a whole variety of physical and mental reasons, could not tolerate the ability to get through. And so tonight what we're talking about is bringing together a curious woman, Emily Pierce, who is now appropriately a first-year medical student, and ask the question, can we determine before it happens whether there are certain physiologic or cognitive changes that occur when individuals are hiking and they're about ready to have a disaster? So she went to the Department of Emergency Medicine and talked to Drew Harrell, and they put together a research project which really asked a number of questions about the physiology of going up and down down and up the canyon. That began a relationship several years ago, and then Sandia Laboratories, with their enormous expertise, and Dr. Kathy Barta, who is the second speaker on this program, is very interested in non-invasive ways to determine whether or not there are changes in the physiology and the biochemistry or in the cognitive state of an individual when they have problems. And finally, and Kathy is the manager of this project in the Department of Bioscience and Engineering at Sandia Laboratories. She is a PhD in genetics and may have some reflection about that as she talked. And Dr. John Fleming, who is assistant professor in the Department of Emergency Medicine, is going to enlighten us about hiking, the dangers of hiking, and sort of bringing together the 3 of them to enlighten you about what we know about the physiology of what happens to people, and also what we might ultimately learn how to prevent it. So Emily, if I could have you come up here and and tell us about this, but I think that this is really a tribute to the fact that this young woman, as a paramedic, asked the question, what can I figure out to do that's going to change the lives of all those people? And she created this wonderful group of people. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me all right? Okay. Thank you for the kind introduction, Dr. Ramo. My name is Emily. A few years ago, I had the opportunity to have a dream job and work in the Grand Canyon, which is what we're going to be chatting a little bit about tonight. But before we start, let me just say I'm very excited to be here. Talking about the Grand Canyon is perhaps my very favorite thing to talk about ever, other than talking about pre-hospital medicine in general. So if you'd ever like to dive down the rabbit hole and talk to me for 6 or 8 hours about that, I'd be happy to. But tonight what we're going to be talking about is I'm going to be introducing you a little bit to the Grand Canyon and our research there. And then Kathy is going to dive into what a wearable device is and how we can use those to measure cognition and fitness. And John's going to talk a little bit about some of the blood work that we did when we took blood samples from hikers at the Grand Canyon. So this is just a brief outline of what we're going to be talking about, which we kind of already went over. Before we talk about the research that we've been doing, let's introduce you a little bit to the Grand Canyon. Just a show of hands, how many people here have been to the Grand Canyon? Oh, well, we can skip this slide. For those of you who want a little bit of a refresher, we are here in Albuquerque. And the Grand Canyon is about a 6-hour drive west of here, depending on how fast you drive. I had it down to the minute for a few years. For about 6 months, I commuted back and forth between Albuquerque and the Grand Canyon every week. So I put 27,000 miles on my car in 6 months. I know every inch of that road. But Grand Canyon National Park was actually founded as a forest reserve in 1893. It later became a national monument, but it didn't become a national park until 1919, just 3 years after the National Park Service was founded. Today, it's over 1,900 square miles, which, fun fact, is larger than the entire state of Rhode Island. It's over a mile deep, and the Colorado River splits the Grand Canyon in half from east to west and is 277 river miles long. Last year, almost 6 million people visited the Grand Canyon. So, when I graduated from college, I was very fortunate to get an opportunity to work as a park ranger at the Grand Canyon. This is what I actually did. And I had the opportunity to work as a paramedic for the preventive search and rescue team on the south rim of the Grand Canyon. So there's a lot of different types of park rangers. There's the park rangers with flat hats in auditoriums that talk to you about rocks and plants and history and things like that. And even though I majored in environmental science, I'm not going to be very helpful with any of those topics. But there's also rangers that work in what's called the Division of Visitor and Resource Protection. And those rangers are law enforcement rangers and emergency services rangers. So they wear a lot of different hats: EMT, paramedic, firefighter, wildland firefighter, search and rescue technician, technical rescue technician, hazmat operator, helicopter manager. It's about as awesome as it sounds. So the PSAR team, or the Preventive Search and Rescue Team, which is the team that I worked for, was founded in 1997 after a series of 6 preventable heat-related fatalities in 1996, including, unfortunately, a 10-year-old boy. The team's mission is to educate visitors on how to hike smart in the canyon. And that might include something like hiking down the trail in the middle of the summer and talking to visitors about where their goal destination is in relation to where they actually are right now, which is usually further than you think. Or teaching people how to stay cool in the summer, or helping people make a plan if they don't have one, which, interestingly, a few people do not. And then this team is also the boots on the ground for emergencies at the Grand Canyon. So when a visitor on one of the main trails has an emergency, a medical emergency, an illness, or an injury, this team is usually the first people to arrive. And we assess the patient, treat them, and decide how to safely get them out of the Grand Canyon. And believe it or not, 99% of the time, despite the fact that they want a helicopter, we walk out. Last year, Grand Canyon National Park responded to 1,200 calls for emergency medical assistance, which is a lot. They also responded to over 300 major search and rescue incidents. And a search and rescue incident can be anything from a heat-exhausted hiker who requires IV fluids and assistance out of the canyon, to someone with a broken ankle who needs to be carried out or flown out, to a multi-day search for a missing person. So these can be very time-consuming events. Only 180 of those events require a helicopter each year. So why are we talking about those statistics? Because it's important to know that the Grand Canyon is a very popular place, and it can be very dangerous for the ill-prepared hiker. The PSAR team was originally founded in 1997 to address the concerns of Grand Canyon's day hikers and backpackers, the most common visitors to Grand Canyon's backcountry at the time. But over the past decade, we've seen an increasing trend in hiking what's called rim to rim, or from one rim of the canyon down, crossing the Colorado River, and back up to the other side, or vice versa, dealer's choice. That descends a vertical mile and then ascends back up another vertical mile. It is a marathon in length, between 21 and 24 miles, but it is not on pavement. It is a rough trail with significant changes in elevation and temperature. So while this hike is absolutely achievable, it is not fun unless you prepare. Over the last decade, we've seen increasing numbers of blog posts and magazine articles about this, which has led to more and more people adding hiking rim to rim to their bucket list and coming to the Grand Canyon to check it off their bucket list. But perhaps they forgot to do a little training beforehand. We have not, interestingly, increased the number of rangers that work at Grand Canyon National Park, but the number of calls for assistance have increased. And we've seen upwards of 1,000 people in a single weekend attempting this hike alone. When you have 1,000 people attempting to do something, it is just a statistical probability that somebody might not be able to do it. And so we end up with more and more requests for assistance, and rangers end up hiking up and down the trail to help people. And while many of those things may be for very simple things like, I'm out of water, I'm out of food, or I'm just really tired and I might whine a little bit until you help me get out of here, it's still time consuming. And we realized that we were reaching the limits of our ability to care for the public safely while taking care of ourselves. So we decided that something needed to change. So in 2014, my supervisor, CJ Malcolm, and I decided that we wanted to gain a better understanding of what it means to hike rim to rim. We wanted to know who was doing it, how long was it taking them, what were they eating and drinking. And so our study started out a little bit like this. I sat at the trailhead in the dark, alone, in the morning, with a little piece of paper and a pencil, and I made a tally mark for every single person that I saw hiking rim to rim. In 3 hours, I counted over 300 people at a single trailhead starting their rim to rim hike. So we decided that we needed more information, which is where John comes in, and the University of New Mexico. So John and I teamed up to write a survey, and off we went in 2015. And then in 2016, we brought another team of experts onto our team with Sandia National Laboratories. So they brought a whole bunch of experts in cognitive psychology and wearable devices. And off we went with our study. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that we found. First of all, let's talk about when people start their hike. What's not up here is what time of year people start their hike. The Grand Canyon is a desert, so it is hot in the summer. The majority of people who hike rim to rim do so intelligently in what we call the shoulder seasons, which is in May and October, when the north rim of the Grand Canyon opens and closes for the summer season. So most people are hiking in the shoulder seasons, but it can still be very warm and even hot on those weekends. It can also snow. Most people start at approximately 5:30 in the morning, which gives them a little bit of a head start on the heat of the day and lets them get a little bit further down the trail to beat the sun. But the reality is this is an all-day hike, and you will be in the sun at some point, so it is worth being prepared for that. People start to spread out a little bit as they go through their hike with varying speeds. They come through Phantom Ranch, which is at the bottom of the Grand Canyon, at between 9 and noon. And then finish times vary tremendously. The fastest known time, interestingly, for hiking rim to rim is just under 3 hours. And last year, someone broke the record for rim to rim, and back again to the other rim, 5 hours and 52 minutes. But that's not the average person. The average person hikes rim to rim in about 12 hours. And a helpful number up here is what's called the interquartile range, or IQR. And what the IQR is it's just the middle 50%. So it's not the slowest people or the fastest people, but it's that middle chunk surrounding the average, and that gives us a nice range around the average of a number to think about. So the IQR here for hiking rim to rim is between 11 and 13 hours, is what most people are doing. Now, interestingly, 65% of people who hike rim to rim are men, but there is no difference in how long it takes to hike rim to rim between men and women. There's also no difference in how long it takes whether you go north to south or south to north, which is interesting because the south rim sits at 7,000 feet in elevation, and the north rim sits 1,000 feet higher at 8,000 feet in elevation. So it would make sense to travel more downhill, wouldn't it? But it doesn't. What is interesting, though, is the difference in how you spend your time hiking. So individuals who hike from north to south spend about half of their time hiking downhill and half of their time hiking uphill. But if you start from the south rim, you spend only 1/3 of your time hiking downhill and 2/3 of your time hiking uphill. The North Kaibab Trail is a bit longer, so you spend a little bit more time hiking uphill. And that makes a difference for a lot of people. Having hiked up and down the trails at the Grand Canyon every day for 4.5 years, my knees do not like those trails as much anymore. And so I prefer to hike south to north because I only have to spend 1/3 of my time hiking downhill. And then I can spend the other 2/3 hiking uphill. But for those of you that don't enjoy uphill hiking as much as I do, hiking from the north rim to the south rim might be a more reasonable plan. So all of these numbers can start to help us pull together an idea of what it is to hike rim to rim. We know that the average rim to rim hiker is in their 40s in age. And we know that the majority of rim to rim hikers have hiked rim to rim before. The most rim to rim hikes we've seen in a hiker so far is 28 times. Not all at once, but 28 times. I have met people who have hiked rim to rim over 100 times. So there's got to be something there if they're doing it that many times. It's got to be enjoyable. We also know that people who have hiked rim to rim before have faster times than first-time rim to rim hikers. And we know that people who have hiked rim to rim before report less fatigue at the end of their hike than first-time hikers. So you can start to take all of these numbers and formulate an idea of what your rim to rim hike might be like, using your age and your experience with hiking rim to rim, your preference for hiking uphill or downhill, and your experience with hiking at the Grand Canyon. So how do people hydrate when they're hiking in the Grand Canyon? About half of people choose to use both water bottles and water bladders like a Camelback system. What's interesting to me is when we're looking at this other half here, 31% of people only use a Camelback or some other type of bladder-based hydration system. To me, that seems a little risky. Has anybody here put their backpack down on an agave or a cactus before? Not? Okay, it's just me. I have lost a water bladder to an agave spine before. So regardless of where you're hiking or what you're doing, neither of these hydration strategies is better. You should drink in the way that you are most comfortable. But what I would say is if you choose to use a bladder exclusively, at least carry something as a backup, because duct tape only got me a few hours up the trail. It's also interesting to think here about how different types of hydration systems encourage different ways that we drink. When you have a camelback bladder or a water bladder of some sort, you have the hydration tube that sits right on your shoulder, and as you're walking, you can just sip. Or you can take a short break and drink a little bit. But a water bottle really forces you to stop and take the water bottle out of your backpack. I'm not coordinated enough to do that without taking my backpack off. And then make a concerted effort to drink water out of the bottle before replacing it. So we think that there may be some differences in how people hydrate based on what they use. And that's one of the questions that we're asking in the future. So down here it says that overall participants consumed a median of 3.25 liters of fluid during their hike. I don't want you to remember that number. I don't want you to write it down. I don't want you to think that hiking Grand Canyon requires 3.25 liters of water. Because the reality is that is an average, and that depends on the temperature that day, the cloud cover that day, and every single individual in this room is going to hydrate differently. The amount of water that you need, or fluid that you need to be appropriately hydrated for a hike like this depends on your age, your body weight, your gender, your fitness level, your acclimatization, any medications that you might take, or any pre-existing medical conditions, just to name a few things. And we have tried for years to come up with an easy answer to the question that we get from every single hiker at the Grand Canyon. Well, how much should I drink? How much water should I drink today? And the answer, unfortunately, is that we don't know. But the other answer is that you should drink to thirst. So we know from studies in the 1940s that the average person develops the sensation of thirst at about 2 or 3% body weight loss, which is equivalent to very mild dehydration. We also know that athletes perform better in a state of mild dehydration rather than overhydration. And that makes sense, right? Our ancestors weren't hunting and gathering with a camelback. So keeping that in mind, drinking to thirst can be a very hard thing to do because everybody wants a very concrete number. And it's a tricky balance because becoming too dehydrated is something that we see often at the Grand Canyon, and it's something that John's going to be talking about a little bit. But becoming overhydrated can also, interestingly, be a problem. When you drink too much water, you can actually dilute the sodium in your blood and develop a condition called exercise-associated hyponatremia, which is low blood sodium, and that can be very dangerous. So it's all about maintaining a balance. We do know that we see far more cases of dehydration than overhydration, but don't overthink it. Just drink to thirst. Don't force yourself to drink. Don't withhold fluid from yourself. So here, we looked at what elevation hikers were from, and we compared it to how long it took them to do their rim-to-rim hike. And interestingly, we found that the higher of an elevation someone is from, the faster they hike rim-to-rim. And that actually makes sense, because while a lot of people think that the Grand Canyon is a desert, they often don't remember that the Grand Canyon is actually at a pretty significant elevation. The South Rim is at 7,000 feet in elevation, and the North Rim is actually all the way at 8,000 feet in elevation. So being acclimatized to elevation can be very beneficial for you. And to put it in very simple terms, an average hiker, for every 1,000 feet above sea level that they live, will complete a rim-to-rim hike 8 minutes faster for every 1,000 feet than a hiker from sea level. So one of the things we did in 2015 was we collected food wrappers from people. So we were glorified garbage men. And it was great. We got a lot of trash out of the canyon that might have been left there otherwise. And we flattened out all the wrappers and we took pictures of them. tens of thousands of wrappers. In case you were wondering, there's a lot of pictures. And some of those wrappers were really great. They were very easy to photograph. They had a lot of nutritional information on them that was easy to pull off. And then others were a little more disgusting, like this banana. And then others we were just confused about. Someone left us a sock in the bottom of their shoe. And not sure where their other shoe is. But let's talk about what people eat when they hike in the Grand Canyon. So these are the most common brands, and we don't endorse any of these. But these are the most common brands that people chose to eat when hiking in the Grand Canyon. So Cliff products, goo, honey stingers, fruit, something natural, Kind granola bars, and Jelly Bellies, interestingly, were relatively common. But what I want you to take away from this slide is not that you should go home to the grocery store and buy all of these things. It's that you should eat what you're used to when you're doing hikes like this, or hikes anywhere, here in Albuquerque, outside of the city, up in the Sandias. You never want to add something new. No new supplements or salt pills or tabs or goos or chews or whatever's popular this week. Eat what your body is used to eating on long hikes. It's really important to do that because adding something new in addition to adding all of the stressors of hiking in the Grand Canyon can really throw you off. And one of the most common things we see at the Grand Canyon is an upset stomach. That's not any fun to have while you're hiking. It's also really important to consider what you eat in different climates and temperatures. So for example, in the summer, I crave salty food when I'm hiking. I eat Pringles and Goldfish almost exclusively. I buy the Costco size. But in the winter, my cravings shift to proteins and sugars, and I eat pistachios and candy bars for most of the winter when I'm outside, not all the time. And so it's important to, for whatever hike you're going to be going on, go on a smaller version of that hike first. Go to the grocery store afterwards, figure out what you like, and then build your hiking menu from there. And when you go on a big hike like this, take twice as many calories as you normally eat in a day, if not more, and throw a little bit extra in your backpack for your hiking partner, just in case they get a little hangry. So we're going to transition a little bit, and I'm going to pass this off to Kathy, who's going to introduce you to the world of wearables. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks all of you for being here today. So I'm Kathy Branda. I'm from Sandia National Labs, and as many of you probably know, Sandia is very interested in what we can do to help improve national security. And for the purpose of this study, what we can do to help military personnel complete their missions both effectively and safely. And so we were funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency to assess how wearable and cognitive assessments can be used to both monitor and hopefully ultimately predict human performance. So we were thrilled when they funded us to join forces with Emily and John to study both military and civilian hikers performing the rim-to-rim hike. Now you may say, well, perhaps we just need to know someone's cardiovascular state, or just need to know their muscle fitness in order to predict how well someone would do the rim-to-rim hike. But we all know from our own experiences doing exercise activities that how we feel that particular day really influences how we do. Maybe we do the same run every morning, but some mornings we wake up and we think, I do not want to be here. Or maybe some days you wake up and you think, I could run forever. Maybe you didn't sleep well last night. Maybe you're really stressed about going to work later on in the day. And all those things are going to influence how you perform in an activity. So we know that both the body and the brain are active in any activity we do, including, obviously, extreme performance activities. And so the research question we wanted to ask was, can we use wearable devices, and in this case, it's just commercial off-the-shelf wearable devices, to measure how the body and brain are doing while we're hiking, in this case, the rim-to-rim. And can we ultimately use those wearable devices to enable us to complete these tasks safely? Now, just to give a little bit more background about sort of cognitive processes and how we know that how they influence performance, we know that there's a very active role in the brain, in this case in hiking or in any physical activity we do. The brain is going to help us determine our response time, how quickly we respond to a stimuli, how fast we're able to make decisions, how good those decisions are. Some of you will probably know anecdotal, from news stories as people get lost in the woods, or over time they become hypothermic. They start to make bad decisions. Maybe they start shedding their clothes, go the wrong way. We know that confusion can set in for very deleterious outcomes. So the brain also impacts how focused we can be, how fast that response time is. So how can we actually measure that while someone is doing exercise, in this case doing the hike? Well, what we did was we took apps. So these are apps we could put on an iPod. Very simple tests, cognitive measures that people could do at the beginning and then also during the course of the hike. When they were stopping to get water or stopping to take a quick break, the iPod would ping and alert the hiker to take one of these simple tests. An example would be the flanker test, where you have to very quickly say whether or not the middle arrow is pointing left or to the right. Whether or not a face that's flashed at you is a happy or a sad face. Whether or not in a screen you see with colors, if a color you see on a subsequent screen was in that original set of colors. These are very simple tests we can do to look at both accuracy and time, response time, to answer that question. And importantly, we're doing these same cognitive tests through the course of the hike to see how performance on these assessments is impacted as fatigue sets in. In terms of looking at the physiological state of someone, we used, again, just commercial off-the-shelf devices, everything from Fitbits to chest straps to measure heart rate, to look at variability in heart rate, to look at breathing rate, etc. And we would have volunteers, and this is both military and civilian volunteers, wear a whole bunch of these wearable devices as they conducted the rim-to-rim hike, and we would collect the devices at the end of the hike, and then again also gave hikers an iPod to do these cognitive assessments throughout. Just to give you an example of some of the things we saw, so some of the data we collected again, as I mentioned before, included physiological assessments, so again, heart rate, breathing rate, etc., but also GPS position, so we knew at what altitude someone was at any given time we were measuring the physiological state, as well as environmental conditions, so humidity, temperature, and along with the cognitive tests. When you take heart rates, when you first look at the data, it's some of the messiest data that we see. So if you can see this sort of gray line in the background is what the raw data looks like as someone's going down a hill or then up a hill. And what we do at Sandia is use multivariate curve resolution and other computational tools to enable us to see the patterns in that data, to see that if you have a group of people going even on a hike together, those that have sort of more of a lower stable heart rate and those that have more, let's say, a higher heart rate or fluctuating heart rate. When we look at the cognitive tests, we can also look at how someone, again, is performing on these assessments through the course of the hike. And one thing that was really interesting that we've observed is that through the course of the hike, as people get tired, and anyone who's doing the rim-to-rim hike is going to get tired, what we notice is that the average civilian hiker, their cognitive scores will start to diminish over time. I know mine certainly would. But when we look at military personnel, we notice that their cognitive scores stay steady the whole time. And you realize this is really important because if you're performing an extreme performance task, it's one thing just to get through it and be really tired at the end. It's another thing to get through it when you're really exhausted and now you're being shot at. So having that cognitive focus all the way through is really critical. And then we also wanted to look, and we're really just at the beginning of this, but how can we correlate the physiological and the cognitive metrics? There's a number of hypotheses you can make. You could argue that fatigue might have a positive effect on response time. In other words, as I'm getting physically tired, maybe not looking around so much at the scenery, I might get a little bit more focused on the cognitive tests I'm doing. Or perhaps as I'm getting more tired, I just can't focus as well, and so my cognitive scores are going to go down. In fact, what we consistently observed is that brain baseline, so these cognitive scores declined as fatigue increases in general. And that, you might say, could be expected, but it's nice to have assessments that we can use to measure that objectively as we continue our work. We still have a lot more work to do to, again, not only be able to accurately monitor people as they're doing a hike or any other mission activity in real time, but to actually predict the outcome. We know that someone's going to be very tired when they do an extreme activity. And what we really want to be able to differentiate is someone who's really tired but will be able to continue and finish their activity versus someone who's really tired because they're about to have a heart attack. And if we could step in and prevent that catastrophic activity, that catastrophic event, it leads to safer outcomes for all of us. So ultimately, our overall goal is to help our role as Sandians doing national security work is to be able to help the military by preventing health events and increasing their performance competence. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John.
Thank you, Kathy. So I get to be last, and as a good friend of mine once said, just be cool, be cool, be cool. Because all the good stuff has been done, right? I just get to kind of coast to the end. And so what I'm going to talk about is the blood work that we've done. And I have the great job of being a translational physician scientist, which if you tell someone on an airplane what that is, they quickly go to sleep and you can end the conversation right there. But what it really means is that I get to do things in the lab, where I get to use microscopes and pipettes and do cool stuff. And then I get to try and see how I can connect that to the real world and to the field. But the other side of that coin means every now and then your boss says, let's go out to the field and let's do some science and then see how we can connect that back to the lab. So where are we going from here, right? I want to talk a little bit about acknowledging the folks that contributed to this project. Often we kind of leave this to the very, very end, and I think it's a good spot to put it in right now. And I want to talk about kind of the bigger picture, some of which Kathy mentioned, some of the other folks that can benefit from the work that we're doing out in the Grand Canyon. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about what does hiking across the Grand Canyon in a day do to you? It does a lot of things. And then who does this? And who can do this, right? These are the questions we want to know. And as Emily will tell you, as the sign says, going to the bottom is optional. Getting back to the top is mandatory. So these are the amazing people that come out and help us out. Now, there are a few people missing from the pictures in here. They're in the auditorium. Drew Harrell, Lucy Jelenkova. They go and hide on the north rim, and then they don't share their pictures with us on the south rim. But those two have done amazing work for catching all the folks that go to the other side, and then catching them when they start out on the north rim and send them back to our side. But a few things I want to point out picture-wise. It's snowing. The south rim is warmer, so Lucy and Drew have to bring extra coats and extra heaters. We start in the dark. These folks, a lot of them have volunteered their time. They're there at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, doing surveys, doing blood work, which also then means I need to highlight the importance of the people who volunteer to actually do this study. Now, I want you to imagine that you've showed up for your vacation, you're crazy enough to hike across the Grand Canyon in a day, you're wearing your short shorts, you've got your t-shirt on because they told you it was going to be hot, and it's snowing. You see Drew at 2 o'clock in the morning can be a little bit of a sight to see. And he says, hey, why don't you answer some questions for me and give us a little bit of your blood and play a game on a phone, right? How many people are going to actually do that, right? We expected maybe 2. You saw, we've got over 1,000 people that have done this. Absolutely amazing. I absolutely love the folks I get to work with. I love the people that we get to study. It's an absolute blast. The other thing from this picture is, can you tell who the physicians are? No. Can you tell who the undergrads are? No. Can you tell who the Grand Canyon Association volunteers are? No. And it doesn't matter. Everybody's out there working together to do the best we can to figure out not only how to help the folks at the Grand Canyon, but as you'll see in the next slide, to help a lot of other folks as well. So who are we trying to help? You can see, that's my sister actually, right? She's hiking in the Grand Canyon. I would like her to get home safe. At the very least because I like my sister, but also because my mom would be pretty mad. Continuing the family theme, this is my brother. He's a firefighter. He goes out and fights forest fires. Everybody here in Albuquerque can appreciate the importance of that quite a bit, right? And since he's my brother, I can also point out that he probably could use a cognitive test and maybe need to turn around at the moment. Also, again, would make my mom happy. And then here's my son. I'm a Charger dad. He's running for the cross-country team. I'd like him to win, right? I'd like him to do well. I would like to be able to run as fast as he can. I can't. Down here in the bottom is a nice kind of mesh of a lot of those things going together. So this is doing medical support for the Bataan Memorial Death March down in White Sands. So now you have people that are doing recreational running. You have the military that is coming out. They're in the heat. They're in the sand. And we want them all to get through this safely. But it's a nice mesh of a lot of the different things that we're trying to do together. So these are some of the other folks that we're trying to help out. So hiking across the Grand Canyon is really pretty hard, but it's also beautiful. So I hiked across the Grand Canyon in a day with this guy who's sitting in the front row. And we did the things that you're not supposed to do. We went in June. It was 40 degrees when we started, and it was about 115 at the bottom, and then it was about 60 on the other side when we popped out. This fine young lady right here is one of the preventative search and rescue rangers. She saw the two of us walking up and said, "Why don't you guys sit down? Here's some shade, drink some water. You might want to take a little bit more time to get back out." But she also said things like, if you wait a half an hour, the rest of your trail out will be in the shade. Very simple thing, right? A very simple thing that we were smart enough to listen to somewhat, but it made it easier for us to get back out of that canyon. Now, the other part of this story is there's a pair of legs that you can't see here. There's a young, very fit person who was hiking kind of the same time that we were. So what happens is people sort of bunch up at different places and they stretch back out. So Phantom Ranch, there's nice shade, there's water. It's absolutely beautiful. You should spend some time there if you can. And so we've seen this kid multiple times throughout the day. As we're sitting in the shade, listening to the PSR ranger telling us to wait a little bit, this young gentleman kept going. And as we started hiking, the ranger comes hiking by us pretty quickly. And we're like, she looks like she's on a mission, right? Because as Emily said, they're the first ones on scene. So as we come up and we see this kid laying on the side, and as you heard, we have a formalized relationship with the park. We said, can we be of any assistance? And the park ranger very rightly was like, no, I pretty much got this, which was true. But then when we said who we were, she's like, oh, well, you can hang out then, that would be all right. Because she had this. She didn't need us. So this kid is not able to sit up very well. He's nauseous. He's like, oh, I'm so donezo. Because he felt terrible. Because he was in a bad, bad way. So I said, what did you eat? What did you drink? He said, oh, I was trying to eat healthy. I had an apple. I had some unsalted almonds because, salt is just not good for you. I had a bagel. How much water did you have? Maybe 6 to 8 liters. So remember what Emily said about 3.25 and how you should not remember that number? At the same time, I had had 8 liters. At the same time, Steve had had about 10. Now we were sore and tired, but we weren't laying on the side of the trail. What was the difference? Salt, right? I had all kinds of bad salty foods, but I was hiking across the Grand Canyon, so it's all good, right? So we quickly, sort of the ranger had already gotten to this point by the time we were there. It was like, we think this kid's hyponatremic. He's got low salt in his blood, and that's why he's feeling so terrible. So she knew that this kid was not going to hike out on his own. You heard Emily tell you, they try to get them all to hike out on their own. We're only 1.5 miles from the rim. We've done the hard part. We just got to carry our asses out the last bit, right? Up here, this little dot is the helicopter she'd already called, because she knows that this is a very serious condition. Now, this kid is talking. He's goofy, but he's talking. And so we sit him up, and we're going to try and give him something salty. And he starts vomiting. Vomit, 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 vomit. And then he goes into a full-blown tonic-clonic seizure. So now, we're on the side of a trail, 1.5 miles from anything besides rock and cactuses. There's a helicopter on the way, but they're not quite there. And we have a seizing kid on the side of the trail. This is what we want to stop. This is what we want to prevent. This is a healthy kid enjoying one of the most beautiful places in the world. And now he's having a very, very bad day. So the helicopter lands, highly trained paramedic comes over, throws an IV in, and I work in an emergency department. I see IVs get thrown into really sick, dying people by amazing nurses and technicians all the time, way better than I can. This paramedic, literally in the side of the trail, throws it in at a goofy angle, first try, absolutely beautiful. They have the capacity to do some blood tests at the side of the trail. We were pretty sure his sodium was low, his salt level was low. It was 125. You should be somewhere around 140. If you are on certain medications, you can drift down to 120, but over time. If you're a young, healthy dude, you probably woke up this morning at 140, and now if you're 125, your brain does not like that. Your body does not like that. This is why you end up seizing on the side of the trail and not going home the way you're supposed to. So we gave him a little bit of super concentrated salt solution, and his breathing got better, but he didn't wake up. Loaded him in the helicopter, flew him off to the intensive care unit. This is what we want to stop. He wasn't doing anything incredibly stupid. Depends on if you ask my mom or not. But he could have done it safer. So, what clinical patterns do we see in the normal people that make it across and get to the other side, right? So we want to know not only to identify the folks that are having a bad day, but we also know that hiking across the canyon in a day, you're not going to be normal on the other side. Or at least you're not going to look like what you did when you started. Some could argue you weren't that normal to start it in the first place, but that's a whole other discussion. So we just started with some basic clinical labs. If you show up to my emergency department and you're like, I feel blah, I'm going to do a complete metabolic panel, right? This is the bread and butter of the labs that we do. I'm not going to go through what all of these are. I'm just going to point out kind of what these show. So the gray is the normal range, right? We have matched samples between when you started and when you ended. There's a few that we have the starts but not the ending, because when they got to the other side, they said, you know what, I want to keep my teaspoons of blood. Stay away from me. We had a few people that went down and said, you know what, I can't cross, I'm going to come back out. And if you really look closely, you can see there was one guy who got to the other side and said, you know, now I'll give blood, but I didn't before. So there's a few mismatches in there, but most of it is matched. Everything circled in red was significantly different from the beginning to the end. And one of the trends I want you to see is that even though a lot of these things are different, they remained often in a fairly normal range. But they were different from how they started in the morning. So some of the trends that we see, hiking across the Grand Canyon in a day is a significant physiologic stress. You become acidotic, right? And that sounds pretty bad, and it can certainly be pretty bad if you go far enough. The clinicians in the room will know that they'll look at this and they'll go, meh, because these people are going to be okay. And that's an important point to emphasize, because all these people made it out to the other side successfully, well, the ones that are matched anyway, and they didn't go to the hospital afterwards. a lot of them went and had pizza and beer, which for a number of reasons is actually a pretty good choice if you're old enough to have the beer. Eob, you can't have any. They also had elevated BUN and creatinines, which showed dehydration. Not surprising, right? A little bit of dehydration is to be expected and probably okay. But what you don't see in here is some of the outliers that are up here. Some of these folks more than doubled their creatinine, which is sort of a sign of acute kidney injury. Some of these people injured their kidney function going across in a day. Again, they'll probably be okay. Probably. Some developed the concerning electrolyte abnormalities. I love this picture here. This is one of the subjects that crossed. He was really fast. He did a great job. This guy was a success. Look at how much salt is on his shirt, right? I bet most of you have hiked at least a little bit out here in the desert. You've had the salt in your eyebrows and on your shirt and in your shorts and everywhere else. So this is just what you can see in his shoulders. Imagine all the other salt that he lost. If you don't replace that, that's going to be a big problem. If you don't replace that, and then you take 10 liters of fluid hiking across the canyon at the same time, now you may have a much bigger problem. So we see a broad range of sodiums when they start, and we see folks that get pretty concerning. Remember the number I told you that the kid had that was seizing on the side of the trail? It was 125. Why didn't this person seize? I don't know. Maybe they started a little bit lower in the day and that wasn't a big enough change for them. Maybe they went and got the pizza and beer fast enough that they missed the window of badness. But the things that we want to stop is getting here in the first place and helping people make better decisions about what they're eating and drinking. That's why we went through thousands of garbage things and counted them up afterwards. So hiking across the canyon in a day causes muscle damage. This isn't going to be surprising, right? We measure this by creatine kinase. If you do CrossFit, you're probably going to be up here depending on how much you did that day. The highest I've seen has been over 100,000. These levels are almost all out of the normal range. These red ones here are probably the ones that if you came into the emergency department, I would give you IV fluids and I would check because I don't want you to have kidney damage. The ones in gray are probably the ones that I might keep an eye on. The rest of them, I would be like, you probably need to hydrate a bit more. Again, these people were the healthy ones that went home. Now, I've seen folks come into the emergency department that have hiked Laluz, or for me, the classic story is, I came from a sea level place. I'm a freshman. I don't know how to do stuff. Like eat and drink appropriately. And I was hiking in the desert today, and now my kidneys don't work because I'm in rhabdomyolysis because I didn't eat and drink and do the things I'm supposed to. But this also has an impact, and I keep saying that, pun is not intended, on trauma. So this may be a little hard to see, but this is a semi. This is a car. These are some firefighters trying to get the people out from inside the car. Now, as I said, I work in the emergency department, so I know lots of you have been in car accidents. I've been in a car accident, just a small minor fender bender, didn't need to go get any care. And I can tell you when I woke up the next day, it felt kind of close to walking across the Grand Canyon in a day. You're going to suffer damage in both of them. And one of the things that we want to understand is, how do we get these folks that have been in bad car accidents do well later on, after they're in the healing process of it? Now, I can't get people to go do car accidents on purpose, at least ethically. But there's lots of folks crossing across the Grand Canyon in a day that I can get samples from on both sides. And I can understand how the body reacts before and after a trauma. That's another part of what the extension of this work can do. So, crossing the Grand Canyon in a day may lead to acidic blood, dehydration, damaged kidneys and muscles. This was sort of pre-ex-ed. This is my son, who is now, as you saw, a charger here. But this is why we come out here, right? This is just a couple miles down the trail. Absolutely stunning, beautiful place. I've been there many, many times. I've crossed the canyon 5 times. I plan on going back. We want you to go back as well. So even although those bad things happen, thousands make the crossing every year, and they do okay. That's part of what we want to understand, is how do so many people do well? What are the things, what are the patterns that we see in the folks that do it? Emily mentioned a lot of them. Go in May and October. Don't go in June. Temperatures are way better. Hydrate according to thirst, right? We're going to talk a little bit about training. We're going to talk a little bit about exercise and experience and how to get to that sort of point. So who are the successful crossers? Emily mentioned age. She said the average age was somewhere in the 40s. But look at this. Look at this. Last year we had a few 80-year-olds. That's awesome, right? I don't have to stop. One of the 70-year-olds who's been doing it for years, I don't know if he was in the 20s crossings or not, but he comes up and he's wearing jean shorts and a Dayglow 1980s like windbreaker, looked pretty awesome. And we were asking people what they ate, right? And you've got the ultra runners and they got their vest and they're like, I had 42.5 ounces of chia seeds and I had some free range, oatmeal and single source heritage artisanal peanut butter. And you're like, that sounds really good. I want that. And then the 70-year-old guy comes up and he's like, yeah, I've done this 20 times or something like that. I'm like, well, what did you eat? He's like, I had an apple and some Vienna sausage. So what's the right answer, right? What did Emily tell you? Don't try something new. Do the stuff that you can eat. Do the stuff that you like. Do the stuff that works for you. Emily didn't say it, but she was telling me this when we were practicing earlier. When you get home from your hot hike and you're dehydrated and you're ornery and you're hangry, go to the grocery store, and the stuff that you want to buy and put in your mouth at that moment is what you should try on your next hike. And that's a great idea. Now, it's probably bad for the checkbook. But if you can eat that stuff then you want to practice eating it here in the canyon as well. So all shapes and sizes, right? It's easy to think that you're going to be some elite runner that's going to be able to manage this. We see all kinds make it across. Now, they make it across in different sort of success. There was a really great group of East Coast folks that kind of wandered up. I had no idea what they were doing. They had their bucket to check. And they made it across to the other side. And when they saw the good Dr. Harrell, they said, are you the doctor that we are looking for? Turns out he was. Turns out that they were successful. Turns out if you looked at them from the beginning of the hike, you'd have been like, good luck, guys. Find us when you get done. Experience is important. This is part of the trail. It's not easy. Going down, going up, either way, it's going to be hard. You're going to be in parts of it in a lot of heat. And it doesn't matter if there was snow on the North Rim, you're going to get hot at part of the day. And then you're going to be cold. And then you're going to do lots of steps. And then you may say inappropriately bad things about trail workers. And then you'll turn around and see where you are, and you'll forget all of that nonsense. And you're like, I'm in an amazing place in the world. So experience helps. The folks that have done rim to rim in a day, most of them do somewhere around a marathon length. So before I went, I had done Lalouse. I had done the Crest Trail, which is around 27 if you make sure you hit the South Summit. And my first time across hurt. I'm not going to lie. I was hobbling a bit. The second time I did it, I was faster. I knew what was coming. I actually got to see a bit more of the canyon because I went from full suffer mode to, oh, look, it's pretty. We know, as Emily said, experience helps. By the time you get done, you're not quite as tired. One of the interesting things that we found, the first year we said, what was the most fatigued you were at the end? And people were like, hey, I'm at the done. I'm done. I made it. Sweet. We'll call it a 6. And the next year, we're like, that seemed kind of weird. So we said, what was the most fatigued you were during the hike? They're like, oh, I was a 10. Well, where was that, right? And it's sections that look like this, where the trail goes like this to like that, and then back this way a little bit. So know that that's coming, right? That's part of what crossing the canyon helps you with. When you get to that part of full suck, you know to turn around and enjoy the canyon a bit because you're going to need to catch your breath and then continue on to the better parts. Local experience helps, right? This is where we get to live, right? So the things that we learn about hiking the Grand Canyon help the folks that are going up the La Luz. Going up the La Luz, hiking the Crest Trail can help you go to the Grand Canyon. We are a desert environment. If you go and you go up and down the mountains, you will experience big shifts in temperature change. Anyone that's taken the tram up and been like in shorts at the bottom and wondering where their coat was at the top, the La Luz Trail is about 3,700 feet of elevation gain. The south rim is around 5,000. The north rim is about 6,000. To kind of give you an idea of what the sort of lengths of those things are. Now, we also don't want you. This is one of these is AMRC, Albuquerque Mountain Rescue Coalition or Council, and the other one is the International Mountain Medicine Group. These guys are here. Try not to call them if you don't need them, and try not to need them. Right? That's part of what we want to talk about today is get some experience, do those hikes, learn how to eat, learn how to hydrate, and enjoy the world that we get to live in. So, hiking in extreme environments can challenge your mind and your body. Train in the environment you want to succeed in. Do the distance. Eat salty snacks and drink according to thirst, and listen to your body. And sometimes listening to your body means, I got down to ooh-ah point, I better turn around and go back up because further is going to be a bad idea. And don't give up. With appropriate training and planning, you can be successful. Don't let things like, I've got a little bit extra, I'm too old. That's nonsense. If you want to do this, you can do it safely, but it's going to take some work. It's going to take some effort. But a lot of people can do this safely. So with that, I'm done.
So if anyone has questions, just raise your hand and I'll come with a microphone and questions of our speakers.
I'm going to sit here.
Raise them high.
Yeah.
I'll sit in between you. Well, that was just absolutely wonderful. I think everybody's ready to go. I'm not.
Carefully.
So a cardiac patient comes to you, and they want to go. Tell them about sort of the strain that you've been able to demonstrate on the heart when these people are walking. I think it's absolutely astonishing to me how profound it is.
Yeah, so we know a couple things. From the physiologic measurements, from both just measuring something at the beginning and something at the end, and then also looking at kind of heart rate changes across as you go across. We're able to sort of look at what an appropriate normal range is. So if you look at a large database of the United States, there's these guys that went into your house, were really calm and really nice, and they took your pulse while you were sitting quietly in your house. And from that, we get the normal range of what your heart should be, right? So a normal heart rate of like 80 or something is probably a good range. But we know that some people are going to be a little faster, some people are going to be a little bit slower. We know what your heart rate looks like when you show up to the start of this hike. It's closer to 100. Probably because you're excited. Probably because you had too much coffee. And we know when you get to the other side, that average heart rate is going to be 120, 130, 140. That hard part I told you about, people get into the 150s, 160s. Now, if you showed up to my emergency department and your heart rate was 150, I'm going to think you're in a flutter. I think you're going to be in an abnormal rhythm that I need to give you medicines for or shock you or something like that. But if you're at that part in the canyon and your heart rate's 150, I'm going to be like, you're probably okay. And the other things that we know is whether you slow down or how fast you slow down or how fast you speed up can actually have impacts on some of the stuff that Sandia's looked at on how are you thinking and how do you train. That has an impact as well. But I will also tell you that we've had folks who've showed up and they didn't tell us at the beginning. They're like, oh yeah, I might have AFib. And you're like, okay, how much Vienna sausage did you have today? They can make it, but again, those folks know their bodies well and they know the environment well. But it can be a big stress to the heart.
But it's clearly not something that I think the average physician would know if someone came in and said, well, I'm going to go to the ground, I'm going to go for a hike.
Right.
No one would know that you'd have a sustained heart rate of 160 or 170 for
Hours.
Yeah, and that is a huge stress. And I think it is actually probably a greater stress than we can do by putting somebody on a treadmill.
I hope so.
Well, Kathy, where do you see the future of these biometric studies that you're doing? What's going to happen? I'm waiting for the day when somebody will put a little pellet in me that tells everything. It'll say, you're about ready to have a heart attack, take 2 aspirin.
Well, I mean, so there's two ways to answer that question. The first is exactly what you've just said, which is personalized medicine. That's, you know, where your doctor, or you can monitor at home, or your doctor can monitor you at any given time. They know where you've been, they understand your genetics, and they understand what you might be succumbing to, so they can help prevent that. From the wearable standpoint, what we really want to be able to do is autonomous monitoring of people in real time, in difficult situations, where as people are in even very remote, austere environments, we can be monitoring their health and know whether or not, again, they're tired and are going to recover later, or we're seeing something that could potentially be very dangerous to both themselves and their colleagues.
Are people at Sandia working on some of these biometric monitors?
Yes, so we also do, we've developed microneedles, so this is work from Ronan Polsky and Justin Baca, who I think may be here, have worked together to develop microneedles that are virtually painless sensors that can go right on the skin. They're like a Band-Aid that can measure the interstitial fluid that's just right under the skin. We're still in the process of researching this, but data so far would say that what's in the interstitial fluid is a good representation of what's in the sera, so that we could use this as a means to monitor people's health in real time, even when they're being very active or in austere environments. So.
See if there are any questions.
Have you studied anybody that's done a rim to rim to rim?
About 10% of the folks that volunteer for our study do we call it an R3 just to make it simpler for us to write. But yes, so the rim to rimmers, their one-way crossing is faster, as you would probably expect. And they are some of the most amazing athletes that we see. And so as we've kind of continued over the years to get more of those individuals, that would be the group of folks that we sort of colloquially call the kind of high performers. And to echo sort of what Kathy said, you know, I showed you a lot of changes that all stayed within the normal range, but they're not normal for that individual. And so when we start thinking about personalized medicine again, one of the things that's come out of these type of wearable studies has been changes in temperature, where, you know, if you came into the emergency department, I would measure your temperature and you're like, nah, whatever, it's close enough to normal. But small changes of bump up of 0.1, 0.2 degrees in an individual signaled infection before they even felt the infection was happening. And so that's part of what this work does as well, is now we're finding individual changes that may be within the normal range, but may not be okay for that individual. And so these R3 folks, these high performers, are the groups that we want to know how much did they change in their day, and what's a normal kind of acceptable happy range to be bumped up. It's a great question.
We found that group is harder to study because they show up to the trailhead in their short shorts and they don't want to take a 5-minute survey and have their blood drawn because they are set on a mission that day, and it's a much longer mission than the traditional rim-to-rim hikers. It's been harder for us to recruit those individuals into the study because they get to the trailhead and they're much more set on what they're doing that day.
Emily, do you have a a handle on how many people planned on doing the rim to rim and then aborted it?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the end of your
And
question.
then aborted it. Didn't
That's a great question. You know, I can't give you a percentage, but I can tell you that on an average day that I was working at the Grand Canyon, hiking up and down the trail, I would maybe see 1 or 2 people who had decided to ditch their rim-to-rim hike. And that's the challenging part about the Grand Canyon. Most hikes here, when you hike the La Luz Trail, you hike up first and then down. So you do the hard part first, and then you turn around whenever you're the most tired, and you go home. And this is an inverse mountain at the Grand Canyon. So you go down, and it's really easy. And then all of a sudden, you're accidentally at the bottom of the Grand Canyon. And so at that point, they might as well finish their hike.
Am I on? I have done rim to rim. Mainly I'm a backpacker, and I probably camped in the canyon somewhere around 175 times. I love just sleeping on the ground, and I don't use a tent except in the middle of winter. So I've been hiking for like 36 years there. This year in May, I guess something crawled in my sleeping bag with me and bit me. And I may never hike again as a result of it. I've been diagnosed with lymphedema and venous insufficiency. So I guess I'd just like to tell everybody, even though you might like to sleep on top of the ground and watch the stars at night, from now on, if I can ever hike again, I am going to be in a tent. So I just thought I'd pass that along.
It's definitely, we talked mostly about sort of the environmental challenges of distance and heat and up and down and hard trails, but as a friend of mine likes to say, the desert bites, and there's a lot of things in the desert that bites, and that's everything from the plants to the rocks to the other things, and I'm so sorry to hear that you had a bad outcome.
Quick question regarding variables that you looked at too, about what people wore in terms of clothing or the pounds they carried going in their backpacks and whether they were successful or not.
That's a good question.
So we have not yet looked at what type of fabric or material people wear for clothing, but this past year we actually did weigh their backpacks, and off the top of my head I'm not sure what the average weight was, but everybody has very small backpacks. I'm one of those people that likes to overpack for everything, so I had a hard time seeing people with these little tiny backpacks. But John, do you know what our average pack weight was?
Probably the 15 to 20 pound range is what we saw a lot of. And again, one of the things that goes into that is where's the water and which way are you going? And so along the North Kaibab, there are water stops that are mostly reliable, but there are sections of it that you have to be prepared for, that if there's a pipeline break like there has been, or something like that, that changes how much you have to carry. But we've seen folks come with big backpacking packs, huge, and make it across, and then they hug Drew. So there's probably some cognitive problems there.
One of the, from a technology standpoint, one of the areas this is going to is actually sensing materials. So something the military is very interested in is suits that people would wear that would sense if they've been, what the environmental conditions are, how their body is reacting, if they've been exposed to something, if they should drink, depending on how much salt is in their sweat or not. And so...
Yeah. We trialed some shorts that measure muscle contraction. Most folks were okay. There was one guy that got the wrong size. You want to use the stuff you're going to wear before you get there. Make sure it fits.
What is the accuracy of these off-the-shelf monitors?
So that is a great question. And John and I were talking about this before. We're not going to advocate for one device or another. But we will say that chest straps tend to be great for heart rate over other kinds of devices. Something that can keep contact with your skin and doesn't chafe or become impeded by sweat is good. But also the other thing to note that's really interesting, and there's been a number of studies on this now, is that some of these devices may not be so accurate in terms of measuring heart rate or heart variability, but they're great to get people to go out and exercise. And they're great from a social networking standpoint. So there was actually there was a Nature article recently called Exercise Contagion. That's about people who all use devices to monitor each other, right? So you can't tell your friend, oh yeah, sorry, I didn't run with you today because I ran this morning. You're like, no, you didn't.
Well, I had one, and I normally sleep about 5.5 hours, always have. And I didn't bother me until I bought one, and I wake up every 2 hours to see if I was sleeping. It was terrible. I finally got rid of it. It made me crazy. Where do you see the research going in your area? What are you going to do next?
So I think some of the really cool parts of this, and especially from the collaboration standpoint, is what I want to do is transfer some of the knowledge we've learned on looking at like heart rate variability in someone hiking the canyon and put that into someone who shows up into the emergency department. And one of the things that I would really like to see is, so you're driving down the road and you blow a tire, you roll over going 90 miles an hour. We know there are folks that are going to die right away. This is why we have speed limits and airbags and seatbelts, right? We know folks that are going to die soon after that, and this is why we have trauma systems and level 1 trauma centers and trauma surgeons that show up. It's that third peak of death that's going to happen later that is a response to that initial stress. And if we can figure out from things like this, knowing, my heart rate variability can predict that I'm going to get an infection later on, and do something about that, that opens up a whole new world. And not only for just the car accident, but for the gunshot, for the deployed military individual that is going to step on an IED. These are the folks that are really long-term is the benefit and the goal that we want. I mean, I love hiking in the Grand Canyon, don't get me wrong, but our long-term vision is really much broader.
Emily, what do you think?
We have one more question over here.
Hi, Emily, I was hoping for some advice. We're going to do a rim to rim next October, north to south, and I really want to hike up South Kaibab rather than Bright Angel because I can't do Bright Angel uphill one more time. Is that bad to think about doing because of the no shade, no water, steepness?
It's a great question, and it all depends on the type of adventure that you want. You're going to have to carry more water, so there's no water on that trail, and it is very sun exposed. So the South Kaibab Trail goes up a ridge line, and the Bright Angel Trail goes up a nice little side canyon. And it has more shade and more water and 3 more miles, and more people. So Ranger Secret, none of us hike on the Bright Angel Trail. I hike out the South Kaibab Trail anytime I'm coming from the bottom of the canyon, but I time it so that I'm not hiking on the trail in the middle of the day. So if you're going to do that hike, October's a great time to do it. The North Rim closes on October 15th, so do it just before then, and you'll be all set with that. And what I would do is hike down the North Kaibab Trail and then hang out at Phantom Ranch. Bring some headlamps and start up the trail at like 5 p.m. The trail is gorgeous at night. If you can time it around a full moon, that's a great time to hike in the Grand Canyon because you can still see the canyon and it's nighttime. I think hiking in the Grand Canyon at night is very underrated, and if you've never had the opportunity to do so, it's a very beautiful way to see the canyon.
Well, thank you. Emily, John, Kathy, this was an extraordinary event, I think, for a lot of reasons. For people in the audience, we have such a wonderful community, and there's so many things to be proud of. I'm so proud of our medical school. I'm so proud of Sandia Labs. And I'm also so proud about people who are curious, like you, Emily. So this has really been a lovely evening. Thank you all for coming.